It's June 29th, 1995. We're in Seoul, the capital of South Korea, and in the city's wealthy Gangnam district, there's one place that all the shoppers really want to be: the Sampoong department store. This massive pink building sports 5 floors and over 70,000 square meters of luxury shops and restaurants. By evening, the place is absolutely packed. Most shoppers are coming fresh from work. Bags in arms, they wander past glowing storefronts, pick up their groceries for dinner, or perhaps grab a bite to eat. Behind the counters, employees check the clock, counting down the minutes until they can go home. But very soon, people start noticing something is wrong. They mop their brows and fan their shirts. They're uncomfortably hot. But why? This is a high-end department store. It's usually blasting icy cold air conditioning, especially on a humid summer evening like today. Why has the AC been switched off? Some people look for store managers to complain to, others just decide to leave. In the end, they will be the lucky ones. Suddenly, alarms blare out across the store. Shoppers panic. Staff, with no idea what's going on, try to evacuate them, but it's already far too late. For many, these frantic few moments will be their last. Some people hear a sharp cracking sound coming from the top floor. Others hear an explosion. Together, everyone looks up, and to their horror they watch as the entire department store comes crashing down on top of them. In a matter of seconds, all 5 floors of the Sampoong department store have collapsed. Hundreds are killed, staff and customers alike crushed instantly under slabs of broken concrete. Hundreds more lie buried underneath the wreckage. Now they're trapped in the dark, scared, confused, and badly injured. Many of them can feel the piercing heat of fires that have erupted from somewhere deep in the wreckage. They're powerless to stop it from roasting them alive. Above ground, passers-by witness a scene from hell. Smoke and flames pour from the gaping centre of the collapsed mall like an open wound, and from inside the wreckage they can hear the muffled screams and moans of hundreds of men, women, and children. Just moments ago, the Sampoong department store was the gem of the Gangnam district, and now it's a graveyard. So what exactly had just happened? Was it a terrorist attack, or perhaps a gas explosion? What could cause a huge luxury department store to collapse so suddenly like this? The truth is, the incident was entirely preventable, and that's what makes it one of the worst man-made disasters in South Korean history. When deciding who to blame for the Sampoong department store collapse, most people point their fingers at one man: Lee Jun, the owner of the store. He started construction on Sampoong in 1987. Seoul had been chosen to host the 1988 Summer Olympics, and developers like Jun were racing to cash in on the new spotlight. But the Sampoong department store wasn't going to be a store at all originally. No. At first, Lee Jun wanted a 4-story apartment complex. To bring his vision to life, Lee Jun hired Woosung Construction, a reputable building firm. The blueprints were drawn, the measurements were made, and soon Woosung's engineers had begun laying the foundation. But then something happened, and it was the first sign that this project was destined for disaster. See, Lee Jun had changed his mind. He no longer wanted a simple, boring apartment complex. Looking at the competition around Seoul, Jun decided he needed to dream bigger. There was more money to be made, and so he told his engineers that he wanted a 5-story department store. Not just any old store, mind you. He also wanted to include a roller skating rink on the top floor. To the engineers at Woosung Construction, Lee Jun looked like a child playing with his Legos. They thought it was a terrible idea, and they told him so. The structure on the blueprints, the one they had already started building, could not hold the weight of all these new additions. This department store idea would be completely unsafe. But Lee Jun was not happy and didn't like being told no. If he had listened to the Woosun Construction Company that day, hundreds of lives would have been saved. But he didn't. Instead, he fired the company and replaced them with his own in-house building team. Now June could do whatever he wanted without protest. And that's when he changed his mind again. Instead of a roller rink on the top floor of his new department store, June wanted 8 full-service restaurants on the top floor. Unsurprisingly, this made things even worse. The restaurants would need heavy kitchen equipment as well as thick concrete slabs for underfloor heating. This is typical for traditional restaurants in Korea, as diners often sit on the floor. Lee Jun also wanted to install artificial ponds. Not so typical. Either way, all of these additions made the top floor of the department store 3 times heavier than what the original design had accounted for, and it didn't stop there. To create more floor space for shopping, June reduced the number of support columns. The ones that had remained were now thinner than regulations allowed, with fewer steel reinforcing rods inside. He even cut into those already weakened columns to install escalators and fire shields. Piece by piece, Lee Jun was engineering a disaster. The construction professionals around him could only watch as their project grew weaker and weaker, dangerous and more dangerous. In the end, there was just one final touch left to complete Lee Jun's luxury mega mall: air conditioning. Not just any old units, but 5 industrial cooling towers, each one weighing around 45 tons. But where to put these behemoth coolers? Predictably, June chose the worst place possible: the roof. These units were so heavy that even cranes couldn't lift them, so workers had to drag them into place using pulleys and rollers. It was slow, grueling work, and during the process, one of the workers noticed a crack in the rooftop slab. Lee ignored it. But despite all this, construction finally finished in 1989. By now, June's building was 4 times heavier than the original design, and safety inspectors told him so. They said that he couldn't open the store because it broke key building codes. It was completely unsafe. But these officials weren't going to stand in his way. June's answer was to bribe them. All 25 of them, to be exact. 25 inspectors and officials. The last line of defense against June's structural monstrosity were quieted with money. And so, the Sampoong department store officially opened in July 1990. This enormous bubblegum pink death trap became an instant hit, pulling in around 40,000 visitors a day. But the cracks on the roof, which had appeared when engineers first installed the AC, never went away. In fact, they got worse. As the heavy units vibrated day after day, summer after summer, the cracks grew, spreading like veins across the roof. And Lee Jun's solution to this structural problem was to order the cracks painted over. And that was problem solved in his mind, at least. Out of sight, out of mind. But the damage, of course, kept spreading. Hairline cracks turned into gaping fractures, not just on the roof, but inside the walls and columns of the building. By April 1995, engineers were getting urgent calls about visible cracks throughout the store. They warned it was a serious, growing threat. And June, of course, ignored that warning. He didn't want to lose a single day of profit, not for repairs, and certainly not for shutting the store down. After all, let's remember that every single day, thousands of shoppers were adding more money to the department store's coffers. These same customers, however, were also adding pressure to an already overstressed structure. And then came June 29th, 1995, a sweltering, humid summer day. At 3 p.m. that day, customers eating on the 5th floor, enjoying the underfloor heating and artificial ponds, noticed cracks on the ceiling. They were slowly growing in size, and some were even the width of a human fist. Soon, the 5th floor began to sag. People could feel it moving beneath their feet. Then the support columns started splitting open, exposing the steel reinforcement bars inside, like fractured bones pushing through skin. You'd think that all this would trigger an immediate evacuation, but Li Jun still refused to act. After all, the store was unusually busy that day, and he just couldn't bear to lose out on all that extra profit. So instead, he called the board together for an emergency meeting. Their decision? Just close the 5th floor and keep the rest of the store open. Meanwhile, they also shut down the air conditioning towers, hoping that reducing the vibrations might stabilise the building. Customers, of course, immediately noticed the heat. But behind the scenes, the situation was far more serious than anyone was actually letting on. Management could already see that the building was on the verge of collapse, and yet they made no public announcement, no full evacuation either. Instead, they secretly evacuated the store's executives, including Li Jun himself. By the time the building came down, every one of the senior leadership team had already left the premises. They figured that their own staff and customers could fend for themselves from now on. By 5:52 p.m, employees on the 4th floor noticed the ceilings sagging. They heard the sound of cracking concrete echoing through the mall. In the end, it wasn't Li Jun or the executives that sounded the alarm, but store managers instead. By that point, however, it was of course far too late. Within minutes, the air conditioning units on the roof fell through. The weakened support columns, now looking like toothpicks, instantly gave way, and then one by one each floor of the Sampoong department store collapsed on top of the people below. Professor Hyung-Sik Chung of Hanong University, later investigating the incident, said that there always exists a critical point. If you go beyond that point, the building collapses. It can take a long time for a building to reach the critical point before it collapses. But then sometimes you just need a drop of water, one drop of water, and the destruction starts. Rescue work began almost immediately, but for teams arriving on the scene, it was like stepping into hell. The mall was flattened, reduced to a mountain of twisted steel and shattered concrete. Hundreds were dead, hundreds more were believed to be alive, but trapped beneath the rubble. Rescue dogs were brought in, but the sheer scale of the disaster overwhelmed them. There were so many bodies and so much blood that the dogs couldn't pick up specific scents. They ran in circles, confused, unable to tell the living from the dead. Electronic heat detectors didn't help that much either. The site was just too large and chaotic. Instead, rescuers had to move slowly, lifting rubble one piece at a time without heavy machinery, terrified that they might accidentally crush someone still alive beneath. Some survivors were close enough to the surface to be pulled out. Rescuers coated them in soap and oil, sliding their broken, dust-covered bodies through narrow gaps in the debris. Others crawled through cracks and holes, emerging dazed and bloodied. Many more, however, were still pinned, injured, stuck in the dark, and with no light and little air. It was also punishingly hot and humid. They wouldn't last long without help. Yuji Huan, a survivor who had been working in the basement level of the store, later recalled, "I could feel a hole in my head so large my finger could go through it. That's how big it was. And I could feel something squiggly in a cut in my back, like my intestine. I didn't want to die. As I looked around, I thought it's just a wall that had collapsed on me. I tried calling out, but there was no answer. I thought it was just me who was stuck there." Hang Kyung-sok, another survivor, later told reporters that he was trapped alongside others. "We held hands and encouraged each other not to lose hope. I desperately wanted to live, even though I felt so miserable and dreadful." To reach survivors too far to pull out, rescuers pushed steel pipes through the wreckage to deliver food, water, and oxygen. But things were getting bad. Fire was spreading beneath the rubble, likely fueled by crushed vehicles in the underground car park. The authorities faced an impossible choice to deal with this. They didn't know whether or not they should order firefighters to douse the flames. The water would certainly save some survivors from being roasted alive in the flames, but at the same time, it would drown those trapped in the bowels of the structure. In the end, they gave the heartbreaking order. Water was sprayed across the wreckage to control the fire. For some survivors, it was a lifeline. The water cooled their bodies and kept them hydrated in the suffocating heat. But for others, it became a death sentence. As the water pooled in the cavities where they laid, they slowly drowned, just meters beneath the surface. It later transpired that others who hadn't been hit by the spray at all, but also couldn't reach the pipe, drank their own urine to survive. Very soon, disaster struck again. A lone wall at the far end of the site, left unsupported, was in danger of collapsing. Time was running out to rescue the survivors. After a week, the mayor of Seoul made a devastating call. Rescue efforts would have to stop. The risk to workers was too high, and the likelihood of more survivors too low. People rarely survive more than 72 hours buried under rubble, so it wasn't worth the risk. Families of the missing were furious. They protested in the streets, demanding that the search continue, but officially the rescue efforts were over. Some families refused to give up hope. One woman, Kang Yun-hee, even camped outside the site for 6 months, still searching for her 19-year-old daughter. She told reporters, "When I go home, I feel uneasy and I don't know what to do. But then I come to this place. I can calm down." Sadly, however, this was all in vain. The rescue mission was now a clean-up job. Heavy machinery was brought in, crews began clearing the rubble in earnest, and with it came the smell. As they dug deeper in the wreckage, they uncovered hundreds of decomposing bodies, piled atop one another, trapped in the tumultuous heat of the Korean summer. The true scale of this tragedy was finally and horrifically being revealed. 502 people lay dead. Of them, 302 were employees. Many others were women out shopping for groceries on June 29th. 937 more people were injured. The collapse of the Sampoong department store remains one of the most devastating peacetime disasters in South Korean history, and one of the worst structural failures the world has ever seen. But the sad thing is, as we know, this wasn't a freak accident or bad luck. It wasn't to be blamed on terrorists or war. Instead, hundreds died and hundreds more were injured because of one man's greed. Lee Jun saw this disaster coming for years and chose to do nothing. For all the judging, though, you could say that Lee Jun was a simple product of his environment. In the 1980s, South Korea was in the midst of an explosive transformation, racing to modernize after decades of war and poverty, and Seoul was smack bang in the centre of it all. Even without the added pressure of hosting the 1988 Summer Olympics, the city was already in the grip of a massive construction boom. Towers were rising, roads were widening, and capital was flowing. There was money to be made, and developers like Lee Jun, operating in a culture that rewarded speed and scale over all else, were primed to chase profit. In the end, Jun was convicted of criminal negligence. In 1996, he was sentenced to 10.5 years in prison, though this was later reduced to 7.5 on appeal. He died of diabetes and kidney disease anyway in 2003, shortly after his release. He was 81 years of age. Jun's son, Lee Hang-sang, the store's president, also got 7 years in prison for accidental homicide and corruption, while several government officials who had accepted bribes during the construction process were jailed and fined too. In the years that followed, South Korea introduced stricter building safety regulations, but by then it was too late for many. By 1995, around 2/3 of the country's apartments had already been built. Just before the new codes took effect, it would take a whole new generation of buildings to introduce better safety standards for South Koreans. And as time went on, the memory of the disaster began to fade. Today, a luxury apartment complex stands on the site of the Sampoong department store. There's nothing there to mark the place where over 500 people died. Victims' families did ask for a memorial to be placed at the site, but their request was denied. No matter how small and understated the memorial might be, in the end it would hurt real estate values, the city said. Instead, the land was sold to a private developer, and a memorial was placed in Yangjae Citizens Forest, half an hour away. Life goes on, but sadly, often in the same ways as before. In September 2018, a kindergarten building in the Dongjak district of Seoul collapsed. Staff had warned of visible cracks and a 10-degree tilt, but their concerns were ignored. In the end, it turned out that a nearby construction site had weakened the foundations. The building actually collapsed, but luckily this happened at night. If it had done so during the day, 120 children would have been inside. And then in January 2021, a building in Gwangju was being demolished when it suddenly collapsed, right onto a passing bus. 9 people died. The job had been subcontracted twice over, and in the end, crucial safety steps were skipped to cut costs. Just a year later, in January 2022, another building in Gwangju collapsed, this time during construction. 1 person died and several were injured. The same developer was responsible, Hyundai Development Company, which had a long history of safety violations and administrative penalties. Since the Sampoong department store disaster, Seoul has only grown taller, shinier, more modern. But beneath all that glass and steel, the same cracks may still run deep, and some skeletons, deep under rubble, are bound to once again come to light.
In the case of nuclear or radiological fallout,